So thanks for agreeing to get involved, Danny. It's much appreciated, and we'll have a chat with you today, and we'll record it, and then I'll share the edit with you guys, so you can just see how it works and what doesn't work. I mean, if we just kind of call this a kind of pilot, I guess, just to see how we'll work it going forward. But Hugo and I spoke yesterday through a load of ideas that we've got for chat, and the more I kind of think about it, the more, and I think Hugo agrees, the more that I think that we can't really do this without you, if you're honest, Danny. Like, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but I kind of feel like if it would just be two middle-class white guys doing this, it's kind of part of the problem. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
Going forward, if we think this is a thing that's going to work, I think it would be great to have you involved if you'd be willing to do it with us. If you've got the time, and two, if you've got, if you're up for doing it.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that. More than happy. And I think it's really good from you guys, because it's something that I was thinking about myself and thinking, not necessarily me, but, I think it's always good to have, I think someone that can, like myself, with other players and maybe other black players, can be sort of more of a sounding board, and my experiences will probably be the same or very similar to what they've gone through. So yeah, I'll be more than happy to do that. I think it will add a dynamic to what you're trying to do as well, and yeah, I think it'll be really good. So yeah, more than happy to.
I'm glad.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really great, because I think I just think that it will give it a lot more depth, and it will give it a lot more. It will just be a more valuable. It will just be a more valuable conversation that we have with whoever we speak to, I think, and help us do what we want to do with this, which I also wanted to cover with you. We kind of spoke last night about what the overall aim of this is, and to try and give it all some structure. And I know. Yeah. Hugo, I've only just got in from work, so I haven't refreshed myself with anything we spoke about last night, but if you've made some notes or whatever, do you want to just go over what we spoke about?
Yeah, I think like one of the ideas that sort of came through is that obviously like Ben and I have like been coming to Dulwich for a little while now. Like we know the club, and we know that it's sort of celebrated as being a club that's like quite like sort of celebrates the diversity of the local area. And within that, like the whole time that we've been coming, the team and the management staff has been largely black, and that's something that's not necessarily reflected in the fan base. I think like we talked about how black fans that come more often than not going to be sort of family and friends of players, and there's quite a sort of, what's the right word? There's sort of a contrast in the face that you see on the pitch and the face that you see in the crowd. And
very true, yeah.
While I think something to celebrate is the fact that, Dulwich is a very friendly, very open club, I would certainly like to feel that anyone who wanted to come to a game would feel very welcome when they come, and I think people would do so. But I think there's never really been like much of a dialogue going on to sort of really talk about some of the issues which are now really kind of coming like up to the surface in terms of the recent protests and the recent movement that's kind of been growing here. So maybe I think Ben can probably like tie up a little bit more of the aims that we want to cover, but I think that was sort of the main idea that we came up with when we spoke yesterday.
Yeah,
sounds good. Sounds really good.
It's something which Danny, I've come across in quite a lot. I've started doing a lot of reading recently, as a lot of people have done, in terms of the history of the black community, and primarily in the UK actually, and the experiences of being a black person in the UK. And one of the themes that keeps coming up, particularly in London, is this idea, and specifically in Brixton, it's come up a few times, is that historically there's been a big Caribbean community in Brixton. Ever since the Windrush generation, right? It's known worldwide, not just in the UK, but Brixton is known all over the world for being a hub for for the Caribbean, immigrants to England. And over the years, there's been, it's been a fluid community in terms of, people have moved in, people have moved out, white people have moved in, black people have moved in, but that continues to happen. But the difference is that now you'll get people move into the area, and I'm specifically talking about Brixton here. You'll get people moving into Brixton, and whereas before, let's say a white family moves in, right, with a couple of young kids or whatever, mother and blah blah blah, they move in. Whereas previously they would have ingrained themselves in the local community, which would have been primarily Caribbean, and they would have become a part of the fabric of that community, which has happened for decades and decades. Now, particularly over the last maybe 25, 30 years, they no longer integrate with the local community, and actually they move in and they kind of live this parallel existence, on the other side. So you've got people who've got a lot of expendable income, usually white people, will move into the area, but they won't go to the same places as the black community. They'll do their grocery shopping somewhere different. They'll go for an alcoholic drink somewhere different. They'll buy their clothes in a different store than the black community. And so they live next to each other, but there's no mixing. There's no, it's just like there's a barrier down the middle, right? So they're living these parallel lives, and none of it's meshing together anymore. And I think, from what I've read about Brixton, and it happens in loads of areas in London now, and what happens is that it just creates and just exacerbates this lack of understanding of being, the experience of being a black person in London and being a black person in the UK, because they're not having conversations with the black community anymore. They're not experiencing the same experiences that the black community are, and so that lack of understanding leads to a lack of empathy, a lack of awareness of what's going on, and then that leads to what we see in London today, in totally unequal opportunities for black people, totally unequal treatment of black people by police, by authority. And I think the key, I think the root of it is this lack of integration and this parallel living, which doesn't help any kind of community development. And I think that is also the case here, like where we are. Like I live literally next door to the ground, and Hugo just mentioned it. Primarily, ever since Hugo and I started coming 7-8 years ago, I remember a period where we probably didn't field a white player for like 10 games, and then you also had a totally black management team, and yet you look in the crowd, and I'd say 99% of everyone coming out of 3,000 people are white. And so that just continues it. Do you know what I mean? They're living on that side of the railing and having their experience. But on the pitch, you've got local lads who've grown up in the black community, and there's just no connection at all. And I think it's all linked. And I think that's what we want to try and do with this is break down that barrier and get the life experiences of guys who've grown up in London as young black men, and get that story across to the people who are our audience, which is primarily white and middle class and privileged, basically. That's a very long-winded way of explaining what I think this needs to be. But
no, definitely. Yeah, it does. I think the biggest thing is education. And I think when you talk about that parallel, what you're talking about is, I don't think ignorance is the right word, but I think people just live in their own world, in their own bubble. So they don't necessarily acknowledge the problems that are out there. And that doesn't mean to say they're racist, not at all. It just means that it's not necessarily a priority for them, or they just don't want to get involved. Sometimes it's a fear of getting involved, and maybe not wanting to ask the right questions, or ask questions full stop. I think, like you said, obviously you look at the crowd at Dulwich, and they probably don't know the experiences that most of us have gone through. And there's a lot of us on the pitch who have probably gone through loads of different experiences. And I can only maybe speak for myself. I can't speak for any other of the players, but if fans want to ask questions and educate themselves about it, they should ask. get to know the players. We're in the bar till 6:30 on home games. There's plenty of time to ask questions. And I think maybe some people feel nervous. Maybe they don't know what quite a reaction they're going to get if they do ask. But I'd like to think that the group of players that we had last season are approachable. You can talk to us, and I'm sure many of them would be more than happy to have conversations. I'm not sure how deep a conversation can be in a bar after a game, fueled maybe with alcohol, but people can at least get to know you. And maybe your perception of me is completely different to the perception that you might have thought I would have been like before you started to get to know me. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but once you get to speak to someone and get to know their personality, it might change the views on what you might think positively, hopefully. But no, I think it's all about education. In terms of that parallel, it's education and being willing to learn and just ask questions.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that I totally agree that I don't think it's not an active racism. I think it is just maybe a nervousness or an unsureness of how to speak to a black person about it. Like and Hugo and I talked about this last night, like in the process of doing this, and maybe even today, like Hugo and I will make mistakes, like when we're talking to people about this, like we might ask the wrong question or we might misunderstand like an answer that we're given or whatever, but that we are willing and we're open to like learning and being educated about all of this. And so, but I think a lot of people are kind of quite nervous of doing that. And I think maybe, in that situation that you talk about, like a player would be perfectly willing, a black player would be perfectly willing to speak to a white supporter about these things. But I think the white supporter doesn't have a clue of how to even start it. And they are like, because it's totally it's like just unknown grounds. Like it's not really the done thing, which is
no.
bad, but it's true. And also there's kind of like, and this is horrendous, and it's the way I have always experienced this since I was a child. It's kind of like unspoken, like you can't can't really talk about it, like it shouldn't be talked about. Do you know what I mean? So
and this is the problem that you're talking about now.
Yeah.
And what has been happening for years, it's behind closed doors. It is we don't speak about that. And like I said, that's not racist.
Yeah.
But that's also not helping.
Yeah.
And that's why you're seeing a lot of quotes and a lot of people coming out saying that silence is as bad as racism. By not speaking out, you're not necessarily part of the problem, but you're not part of the solution either.
Yeah.
So someone like yourself, you're passionate about it, you want change, but if you don't speak out and try and help, then it doesn't matter how you feel, because you're not really helping. And I think platforms like this are perfect for those supporters that might be nervous and might be apprehensive and anxious, because then they can see, right, well, I didn't know that happened. There's going to be things I speak to you guys about this, and you're probably not going to believe that would have happened.
Yeah. Sure.
And this is what this is for, because the black players at the club, we're all proud of who we are. We all love being black. We're all proud of being black and our heritage and our backgrounds. And for us, or for me, I'm going to speak for myself. It's easy to speak about it. This is my life. This is my experience. It's easy for me to speak to you guys about it. It's hard for you to ask me. And what it needs to start being is probably a bit easier to start asking these questions and having conversations about what experiences you've gone through. Because how can you have change if you don't know?
Yeah.
How can you try and help?
Why this is particularly relevant to Dulwich, and I think why this is a really kind of useful way of tackling this, or at least beginning to tackle it, is because we can sort of look at it and go like, oh, we've got a black manager, we've got one of the most successful black managers in British football, full stop, and that's great. And you would never get an instance of a home fan racially abusing someone, and if you did, they would be out the door quicker than you could, drop a pin, sort of thing. But that's not really how you make progress.
No.
Just because there's like a zero racism sort of zero tolerance policy to racism at Dulwich Hamlet doesn't mean that it's perfect, or that it makes it any easier to sort of, you know, make any progress in society, and certainly the kind of wider local society that we kind of want to see around the club. So I think this is something we sort of agreed last night, that this is why, you know, Dulwich Hamlet is kind of like the perfect launch pad to really kind of look at some of these issues and start to have some of these conversations that we haven't really been able to do or have been unwilling to do in the past.
Definitely. And I think we talk about the supporters as well, and the lack of diversity in terms of the supporters, and how as a football club can we now change that? And it's great that we have the fans that we do. It's brilliant. Every fan is brilliant. Like I said, it's similar to when I was at Whitehawk in terms of the people are for diversity, but it now needs to be reflected, I guess. And how can you attract that diversity to the football club? I think that's a big thing. What are the club doing? What are the community guys at the club doing to attract the diversity? Why should a black man come to a Dulwich football game apart from just because there's black players? You know, what is there for? How can he relate to it? How can he feel part of a family there? Is it because it's just a black manager, or is it because, do you know what, we're welcoming? There's certain initiatives, certain ideas that we have that will really, you know, make you inclusive and make you feel part of the family. And that's another thing that should maybe be a part of the agenda at some point.
Yeah, that's brilliant that you said that, because I think something that we just even spoke about this morning, Ben and I, was that we want to talk about like serious issues here, but we also kind of want to present something positive. We want to present solutions, and, you know, start, like, if we start to think about what we as a club, what we as like local people and supporters can do to try and, like, you know, move things forward, I think is really helpful, and exactly, you know, why it's worthwhile that we're doing this.
Definitely. No, it's good. This is how you get change, isn't it? You know, this is how you get change. You know, it starts from an idea, and that idea manifests into something bigger. And I think if we keep growing it and keep talking to people and keep trying to bring about change within the club, and, you know, I'll be more than happy to be that ambassador and be the one out there and put my face out there and try and help bring people to the club, in terms of that diversity, which is what we would like to see.
That's great, man. That's great to hear. Really appreciate it. I think just thinking about how we structure this and kind of the time length of it, I think we try and keep these chats under 30 minutes, I think, because even though I'm aware that we could probably, like, we could speak to you, we could speak to whoever we speak to next for hours about this, but
definitely,
I think that people's attention spans are, you know, anything past half an hour, I think we might struggle really. I think how do we want to like introduce our guests? I feel like we should have like a structured like introduction for guests every time we speak to them. So it could be like, I don't know, like name, age, like the way you were born or something like that, and then that can kind of kick us off and introduce. And maybe do we have what's your link to Dulwich Hamlet, or just something so we can kind of kick off every episode with a bit of structure? What do you think? Like, you both of you? I'm not really sure. I haven't really thought about it much, to be honest.
I think sort of maybe a little bit of a background on the player's playing career, just so people get an idea, and like you said, where they were born, possibly, where they grew up, and probably their association to the club, really, what year they played for the club, maybe appearances, perhaps, something like that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds cool.
And then I also think as well, like I've said previously, is, and I'm more than happy to sort of do this because I'm maybe closer to the players, but it's giving the players time to have an idea of what questions are going to be asked. Can maybe give them a list of questions and say, pick your top 3 or something like that you are happy and comfortable to speak about, along with maybe a few experiences that you've faced. Because what it does, and I'm going through obviously this right now, is it gives you an opportunity to actually reflect on what has happened, and it gives you an opportunity to have time to how you're going to express what's happened to you as well. If you're on the spot, it's sometimes a little bit difficult, and sometimes it needs to be more, not necessarily scripted, but certainly thought through and planned through. And also, if you're happy to speak about certain experiences as well, sometimes you might forget about the experiences or little details in the experiences, which can have a major effect on how it's perceived. So it's nice to actually have the time to plan it as well for them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it would be worth us.
Me too, yeah.
I think it'll be worth us just having a 10-minute chat with them before we actually do the recording, just to take them through how it will work.
Definitely.
I think that's probably a good way to do it as well. But yeah, I mean, in that case, should we just kick off with trying out how this works now?
Yeah, sure.
Everyone's ready. Like, if we'll do a little intro, and you, Danny, if I can get you to take, I'll kind of prompt you in your career up to this point, I suppose, to Dulwich, and we'll go through a few bits and pieces of what you just mentioned. Like where you grew up and whatever, and then there's 3. You say there's 3 kind of experiences that you wanted to mention.
I've got a lot more, but I thought I've got 3 experiences. Unfortunately, I've got a lot more, should I say? But I've got 3 sort of. I was trying to think about what to speak about, to be honest, and what's really going to kind of maybe have an impact on what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I was speaking to my wife about this as well, and I've got 3 periods, different periods of my life. So I could easily talk about, I've been stopped 3 times, 4 times in my car, but I'd rather just say one of those times. Do you know what I mean? So for example, I've got, like I said, an early age experience, sort of like I said, 20 years old and 24 years old, just different periods of my life, and completely different experiences, which will obviously give yourselves an idea of what's happened, and obviously the people as well out there of what's happened. So yeah, it's just different experiences which has happened. So do you want me to just sort of kick off with them, or how do you want to sort of?
I think if we can kind of prompt you, I think if maybe we can just say what's the first experience you want to talk about, and then maybe like we could wrap it up and then like kind of move us on to the next, and just ask you if there's anything more you wanted to say on each experience. Does that work?
That works.
Right. Well, have you got anything else to go through, Hugo, before we try and record this?
Yeah, I guess once we've kind of talked about the 3 experiences, is there anything else that we want to talk about, maybe in terms of kind of moving on from this?
Yeah, I guess you should probably have a consistent like finishing conversation that we do with every recording. Maybe it's maybe we ask the guest, in this case Danny, maybe we ask, I don't know, like maybe
I'll tell you how we finish it.
Go on.
Solutions. So we can identify problems, we can identify people's experiences. Okay, so what? What is the solution? How do you feel that we're gonna come about change? I've got different stats as well about black people are more likely to be stopped by police, etc. These are all good things, and all good things that we could talk about and give stats about that as well. However, the biggest thing is solution. How do you bring about change? And one of the things that we obviously spoke about was education, action, people are protesting, etc. But definitely asking the guest, what is their opinion on how do you think this is going to change? How are we going to get better? How are we going to get police to stop stopping black people 8 times more likely to stop black people. How is that going to change? 8 times more. How is that going to change? And different things like that. And I think giving the guest an opportunity and a bit of time beforehand, they can come up with more time, you're probably going to come up with similar solutions, but there's always going to be some that will have a lot different opinions on how change should come. But I think that's the big thing.
Yeah. And I don't think that's an issue necessarily if there's some crossover in the answers to that question. It kind of reinforces a point in that case. But yeah, like you say too, I think some people will probably have a quite unique spin on it for themselves because, everyone's different, aren't they?
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I really like that, I think. As that can be the sort of, if it's in 2 halves, we begin with the experiences and then the second half is solutions, change, action.
That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I think as well, I think if we could consider that question both in the context of Dulwich Hamlet, but also kind of more broadly, like, what are you doing outside of your interactions with the club?
100%.
Yeah, as long as we just I totally agree. As long as we just make the solutions achievable and realistic, because I think
Of course.
I think that a lot of the time people kind of feel like, and this is another thing which is in my head all the time at the moment, they kind of feel like they're a bit helpless because they don't really know where to start. So I think as long as we make it like as simple as possible, just like having a conversation with a friend or about this, or reading into that, or like something that's not too big, and so we don't finish.
Oh yeah.
People are like, fucking hell, what? So if we just try and get like micro solutions, I guess, like that people can just do on their own, and then they can tell a friend, and then they'll tell a friend.
Yeah, 100%. That's how you do it. Yeah, that's how you do it.
All right, cool.
That's great. Yeah.
All right. Well, I pressed record ages ago, so this is I've already got
You've got a lot of editing to do.
Yeah.